Welcome to another episode of the Prognosis. Kamal Shah, the founder of NephroPlus, is not just any entrepreneur, but he's also a dialysis patient who turned his own personal health challenges into a mission to revolutionize kidney care in India. Welcome to the show, Kamal.
Thanks so much, Vivek.
Why don't you take us through what NephroPlus is?
NephroPlus is Asia's largest dialysis service provider. We provide hemodialysis, which is a replacement for kidney function.
What were some of the gaps that the traditional healthcare services providers had left?
Nobody was looking at it from the patient's perspective. Hospitals were looking at it from their perspective. Doctors were looking at it from their perspective. The dialysis clinic used to be very depressing. Nobody used to give a thought on how can we make this place a little more cheerful. The first clinic was a proof of concept, just 4 beds, 4 machines, piloted everything we wanted to hear. Cheerful interiors, free Wi-Fi internet, a TV for every station, easy billing, wheelchair accessible weighing machines.
How was the initial response among the first few adopters of your clinic?
Yeah, one important thing we did at that time, Vivek, is that we decided to change the terminology. We decided to call our patients guests and not patients. We felt that the word patient has a slightly negative connotation. The first image that probably comes to people's minds is sick, bedridden, weak individual. Like I said, I swim every morning, I work full day, I travel, I do things that all healthy individuals do. So we said that dialysis patient should not have that negative feeling to it, and we were looking for a positive, term to use. And in India, there is the culture of Atithi Devo Bhava, right? So then we thought we should call our patients guests and not patients.
What is the magnitude of the problem every year? How many people need support?
Statistics show that 1 in 10 people have early chronic kidney disease. Out of that, again, 10% would be in the range of people who actually need dialysis. Roughly, if you look at it in India, 1.3 lakh people actually need dialysis.
Welcome to another episode of the Prognosis. Now, they say that some of the best and most impactful businesses are born out of founders' deeply personal experience. Now, this statement cannot be truer in case of our guest today. Kamal Shah, the founder of NephroPlus, is not just any entrepreneur, but he's also a dialysis patient who turned his own personal health challenges into a mission to revolutionize kidney care in India. Welcome to the show, Kamal.
Thanks so much, Vivek. Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here, Kamal. For the sake of our audience, why don't you take us through what NephroPlus is, the scale, the complexity of the operations, what do you guys do?
Okay, so NephroPlus is Asia's largest dialysis service provider. We provide hemodialysis, which is a replacement for kidney function. So when a patient's kidneys don't work, there is a process called dialysis that needs to be done that will perform the function of the kidney, not as efficient as human kidneys, but at least to a certain extent to be able to sustain life on a long-term basis. That is what dialysis is. NephroPlus is a chain of dialysis clinics where we set up clinics in various parts of the country, and we set up dialysis machines, and we provide hemodialysis to patients who come to those clinics for the treatment.
And you have about 400, 500 odd centers as of today.
About 450 right now in 4 countries.
So Kamal, why don't you take our viewers through the journey of NephroPlus? It's a very inspiring story. So all of us would definitely like to hear how it started. We have heard bits and pieces of the story in the media. We have also seen some of it in the book that you wrote, but would love to understand more.
Sure. So story starts way back in 1997. I had just finished my chemical engineering. It was July. I got admission for my master's in chemical engineering in the US, got my visa as well. And in those days, there was this rule that students who were going to the US for further studies had to take some vaccines. It was a mandate for foreign travel for students in those days. So like all my friends, went to a government hospital, got the vaccines, got the certificate, and developed some symptoms that evening, which the doctors said that there would be some side effects, but nothing major. So just ignore them and you should be fine in a couple of days. But when the symptoms didn't subside even after 3-4 days, we contacted our family physician, and on the family physician's advice, got some blood tests done. And the blood test showed that my kidneys had failed. Nothing wrong with the vaccines per se, because rest of my friends, nobody had any problem. But we learned later that I have a genetic mutation in my body which in the presence of vaccines can cause a disease called atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is an ultra rare disease. It impacts only 2 to 3 people per million across the world. So I was unfortunate. I had that mutation, and with the trigger of the vaccines, I got this disease. And this disease can cause the kidneys to fail. So that evening, I had to be put on dialysis in 2-3 days, and life suddenly became very uncertain because my friends were all going to the US one by one and beginning their masters, and I was connected to a dialysis machine. I had to do this procedure thrice a week. So the doctor said that it's a temporary condition, that in a few days the kidneys would come back, they would get back their function, and then I would be normal and I could go to the US and do my masters. But weeks turned to days, days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, and the kidneys were not showing any sign of recovering. So I asked my doctor, what's happening? Isn't there something we can do? How long are we going to wait? Doctor had no answers. We tried a host of alternate therapies, Ayurvedic, homeopathy, acupuncture, acupressure, miracle healing, all kinds of things, but nothing worked. So like this, about a year had gone by, and my doctor said that I need to now undergo kidney transplant. So I underwent a kidney transplant as well. My mother donated.
Oh.
But in this disease, even after a transplant, there's a high chance of recurrence of the primary disease. So that's what happened in my case also. A few days after the kidney transplant, the AHUS, my primary disease, recurred in the new kidney as well. I was back on dialysis. I switched to a type of dialysis called peritoneal dialysis, which can be done at home. And then life started coming back to normal, because that seemed to be a much gentler therapy, much more, easy on the body. I started a software development company with some family friends.
Here in India?
Yeah, in India. We had an office eventually in the US as well, but the development was being done here. So that did pretty well. And I started traveling as well. But on one such trip, I was in Mahabalipuram, the South Indian beach town near Chennai. And we reached there on Christmas Day of 2004. And the next morning, a tsunami happened. The tsunami of 2004, we were at the beach. And in that process, we somehow escaped. We didn't get washed away by the water. But in peritoneal dialysis, there is a catheter that is placed in the stomach that got infected. So we tried a lot to save that catheter, but in the end, I had to give up PD, and I was very disappointed because PD had given me my life back, and now I couldn't even do that. So my doctor then suggested that I do home hemodialysis, which is the same hemodialysis, but it's done at home. But I would do it 5 nights a week, the whole night, 7.5 hours at night. That again gave me back a very good quality of life, and I started working again. I started swimming. Started writing a blog about my whole journey with kidney disease. And that blog became popular among kidney patients and nephrologists and so on. And at one point, if you Google dialysis in India, my blog would come out right on top.
Okay.
So then I started receiving emails from patients, from doctors and so on, asking questions about the journey and so on. I suddenly got an email from somebody called Vikram Uppala, who said he was a healthcare strategy consultant, hadn't met him, didn't know of him before. He said he stumbled upon my blog while researching ideas for a healthcare startup in India, and he was intrigued by what he read. So he suggested that we meet up the next morning and talk about dialysis and what can be done better. So we met up the next morning, and then we started brainstorming on the problems faced by dialysis patients and what could be done to fix those problems. And then over several conversations, the whole idea of a patient-centric dialysis company started taking shape. And then we started the first center, and then here we are today.
Wow, amazing. So Kamal, what was the better product or better service that you and Vikram and your third co-founder Sandeep, who has now moved on, I guess,
Right.
What was the better product in your mind? What were some of the gaps that the traditional healthcare services providers had left? And you were in a metro, so I'm assuming that while India may be behind compared to the West, but at least whatever best was available in India was accessible to you. So what were some of the things that you thought was missing?
So I think the primary thing was nobody was looking at it from the patient's perspective. Hospitals were looking at it from their perspective. Doctors were looking at it from their perspective. Nobody was wondering about what a patient needs from a dialysis center when they come to one.
Sure.
So things like just to give you some small examples, like the basic, the dialysis clinic used to be very depressing. It used to have, like, nobody used to give a thought on how can we make this place a little more cheerful. So what the paint would be very dull, the lighting would be dull, there wouldn't be too many open windows. So the whole atmosphere was very depressing. Then nobody was looking at this whole important thing about seroconversions, cross infections, right? People were getting infected with hepatitis C, hepatitis B, and HIV after coming to the dialysis clinic to get treatment for their kidney failure, which arguably those three diseases could be worse than kidney failure itself, which is criminal, So nobody was looking at that problem. Nobody was looking at diet. Diet, they say, is 50% of a dialysis patient's treatment. Nobody was focusing that much on dialysis, on the diet that a dialysis patient needs to follow. Or, the whole holiday, taking a holiday on dialysis. Nobody gave a damn about whether patients went on a holiday, what could be done to make it a little more convenient. Nobody would tell the patient that dialysis is not the end of life. After coming on to dialysis, you can lead a completely normal life. So these were some of the things that we felt were lacking in dialysis centers, and basic hygiene also. Like, just to give you a small example, one of the centers that I was going to, there was a cockroach lying dead on the dialysis clinic floor, which was very disturbing. So these were some of the things that I felt could be fixed, but were not being looked at with the seriousness that they deserve. So that was what primarily the three of us started looking at in terms of trying to address one by one what we could do to fix these problems.
And what was your first, where was your first center launch? Take us through the process of iteration of finding out what the right product or model was.
Yeah. So the first center we said would be a proof of concept, because 3 kids out of college trying to do something as big as dialysis, and none of them has any medical background whatsoever in terms of actual clinical background. Some of the doctors were laughing that, oh, these 3, what are these guys going to do? So, the first clinic was a proof of concept, just 4 beds, 4 machines, small staff, but we piloted everything we wanted to hear: cheerful interiors, free Wi-Fi, internet, a TV for every station, easy billing, even things like wheelchair accessible weighing machines. A lot of these small things we started implementing, and the main thing which we did was the quality of dialysis. So we came up with a protocolized approach to dialysis, where we documented every single step of the dialysis process, right from when a patient walks into the center to the time when they leave the center. Every step would be protocolized, right? So that would ensure that whoever came, whatever staff came, whichever center we did, or however big we became, finally the quality of dialysis was paramount, because that is the baseline, right? Everything else is built on top of that. If we are able to give quality dialysis, then we felt that our patients would get their life back, because that is the most important thing. When that 4 hours on the machine happen, they should be the best possible that a patient can get from those 4 hours, because that's what is going to keep them going for the rest of their life. So we wanted to make sure that quality was just the best possible in those circumstances. So we came up with a lot of things that would ensure that that quality was met, like RO, the water treatment plant, what tests needed to be done, how often they needed to be done, what should they be doing, the machine parameters. Like, many people don't even bother about what the parameters of the machine are. Just machine is going on. But there are so many parameters that actually impact the quality of the cleaning and the ultrafiltration that happens. Who's looking at those things? These were the things that we were trying to fix.
And Kamal, as we were discussing off camera, I have some personal experience. My father was on dialysis for a very long period of time, and we also tried. There were 2 different centers that we used to try, whichever was available, because in those time and era, access to a dialysis bed was like very, very difficult. Yeah. The outcomes in case of both centers were wildly difficult. So one used to be Wokhart Hospital in Calcutta. So a dialysis at Wokhart, he was fine for 3 days. But a dialysis at some other center, we used to clearly observe that within 1.5 days, he used to fall short of breath.
Absolutely.
What are some of the areas where providers, either from the perspective of cutting corners or not having the right knowledge, what goes on behind that, let's say, the dialysis centers?
There are 2-3 things that are most important. One is the parameters that are set on the machine for a dialysis treatment, right? Parameters like conductivity, the sodium level, how much water you're removing, what is the heparin that is going in, what is the blood flow rate, what is the dialysate flow rate, the composition of the dialysate itself. This is all related to the machine and the aspects that are connected to the machine. Then you have a very important thing called the water treatment plant, which is a reverse osmosis water treatment plant.
Got it.
That water treatment plant is extremely critical because it is going through that artificial kidney, the dialyzer that is actually doing all the magic of the dialysis treatment. That water is actually going through that and it comes into indirect contact with the blood. So if that water is not taken care of well, then the whole dialysis process can be extremely challenging because there are complications that can happen during the dialysis treatment, like shivering that can happen for a patient. So that all these things are all reliant on the quality of the water treatment plant and what monitoring is being done, what tests are being done periodically. So these are the 2 things that are most important. Of course, there are a bunch of other things, but the machine treatment parameters and the water treatment plant, these 2 are the basic things that are important.
Sure. Kamal, one aspect of building in healthcare, the reason what makes it more difficult compared to other, let's say, consumer sort of businesses is that it's very difficult to communicate your value proposition to the patient because let's say if you are better in quality in some aspect for XYZ reason, that's very technical in nature and difficult to explain. And the other aspect is that dialysis procedure is always recommended by and let's say supervised by a nephrologist.
Right.
So you visit a consultant nephrologist, the nephrologist will recommend a particular dialysis facility to you, and unless let's say cost or accessibility is a concern, you would normally not want to go to another facility.
Right.
So how do you, in the initial days, and plus you guys had no clinical background, you did not have, let's say, the blessing of a top known corporate hospital chain. So if today Apollo has to launch a dialysis center, a normal consumer would believe just because of the brand perception that it's supposed to be good. How did you build trust with various stakeholders, in your case, the doctor, the patient? What were some of the things that helped you in your early days?
So I think initially the patients, it was a challenge. First several months, we barely got any patients, but through some contacts, we reached out to a nephrologist, a senior nephrologist in one of the top hospitals, and we said that we're doing this. So can you send some patients and try us out? That was the initial initial pitch we made to them. And thankfully, they supported us a lot in the initial days and they sent a few patients and the feedback that they got was amazing. So the patients felt much better. They felt more energetic and they loved the way the center was designed. So that feedback kind of went back to the nephrologist and he sent more patients. Then the second center we set up was in a place called Sikandrabad, which is about 10 kilometers from Hyderabad, our first center. The first center's nephrologist had a colleague whom he recommended and said that these guys are doing a good job. Why don't you try them out in their second center? So then the second nephrologist, he joined us for the second center. And then that way, slowly the word started spreading that these guys are doing something right because the patients were happy. The nephrologists were happy with the results. The nephrologists were getting good feedback from their patients. So overall, I think that slowly helped to spread the word. And then the third center was in a town that is 100 kilometers, a tier 3 town called Mehboob, about 100 kilometers from here. And the owner of that hospital happened to work along with the second nephrologist that I talked about. So he asked this guy and he gave very good feedback again. So he outsourced his dialysis center to us, and in fact, he didn't have a dialysis center. He invited us to set up a dialysis center in his hospital. So Mehboob, in fact, in those days was such a torture because patients used to travel 100 kilometers to Hyderabad thrice a week, like you were mentioning, thrice a week, 100 kilometers to get dialysis. And when we set up this beautiful looking, very high quality dialysis center in the tier 3 town of Mehboob, patients were just so thrilled because they couldn't believe that they didn't need to travel and they were getting better quality dialysis right in the next to their homes.
Sure. Let's talk about the softer aspect, and that's very, very important because again, to bring that personal experience for the sake of our viewers, you typically go to a hospital when you are ill. But imagine going to a hospital 3 days a week for the rest of your life. If you go to a facility which smells like a hospital, you feel perpetually ill. And in a lot of dialysis patient, fatigue creeps in after a certain point of
Absolutely.
time. They just give up.
Yes.
Because who wants to go to a, let's say, a facility that smells like hospital and everyone around you is sick.
Yeah.
When you are actually, you have a condition that needs you, so you need support, but it's not like you are perpetually ill.
Yes.
Where, of course, this insight must have come from your own personal experiences, but why don't you double click on this? How was the initial response among the first few adopters of your clinic?
Yeah. So one important thing we did at that time, Vivek, is that we decided to change the terminology. We decided to call our patients guests and not patients.
Okay.
Because we felt that the word patient has a slightly negative connotation. When you hear the word dialysis patient, the first image that probably comes to people's minds is one of a sick, bedridden, weak individual. But like I said, like I swim every morning, I work full day, I travel, I do exercise, I do things that all healthy individuals do. So we said that dialysis patients should not have that, that negative feeling to it. So we said we were looking for a positive, term to use. And in India, there is the culture of Atithi Devo Bhava, right? So then we thought we should call our patients guests and not patients. And to start with, that gave a breath of fresh air to the whole ecosystem, right? So when patients were walking in, we were treating them, we were greeting them with a smile. We were, and the quality of dialysis was there that automatically made them feel much better. So just to give you an example, there was one lady who happened to move her residence, and just by virtue of that, she happened to be closer to a NephroPlus center. So just for the distance factor, she switched her center to one of our centers. Within 3 to 6 months, she started feeling much better, and she sent me an email saying that I did not realize that I can feel so good on dialysis. People had no idea that you can feel normal on dialysis. So that was one major win for us, because just by no additional, of course, the effort to implement those protocols to make sure that the quality of dialysis was good was there. But other than that, there was nothing additional that we needed to do. It was just implementing those basic quality protocols by which the patients felt so much better. That itself was a big win for them. So, and then apart from that, you had all these other things like, a cheerful interior, you had free Wi-Fi, internet, you could come and do your work. A lot of working professionals nowadays get onto dialysis. So they come after their work, get dialysis from 6 to 10. They finish off their emails and stuff like that on the dialysis session itself. Then they go back home. So that whole normalcy, right? That normalcy was what people were actually missing from their life. Their entire life started becoming about dialysis. Their and their families' lives was completely revolving around dialysis. That was something that we needed to move away from. Dialysis should remain only a small part of the patient's life, not become their whole life.
Sure. Now, Kamal, for the sake of our viewers, why don't you explain the magnitude of the problem? How many people in India are diagnosed? And we were discussing off camera that there's probably an equal or a larger number of people who are not even diagnosed at the right time.
Yeah.
How big is the, if I can use the word market for, let's say, or what is the magnitude of the problem every year? How many people need support in form of dialysis?
Statistics show that 1 in 10 people have kidney disease, right? Early chronic kidney disease.
1 in 10 of population?
Yes.
Wow.
Have some form of kidney problem, kidney disease. Out of that, again, 10% would be roughly in the range of people who actually need dialysis.
Sure.
Right? So roughly, if you look at it in India, rough numbers would be about 1.3 lakh people, right, actually need dialysis.
So as of this instance, 1.3 lakh people would be on
dialysis
support. Okay.
However, the problem in India is that only about 10 to 15% of people who need dialysis actually get dialysis. So if you look at it, it's 130 crores is the population of India roughly, right? Yeah. So about a tenth of that, which is about 13 crores, actually have some form of kidney disease. Sure. About 1.3 crores actually need dialysis, but only about 1.3 lakh are actually getting dialysis.
So 90% of the people
are just undiagnosed and they'll just suddenly die without treatment. That number is slowly becoming better because the government is getting into dialysis and this whole Ayushman Bharat and the various state run health schemes that are there. That number is now probably about 85 and maybe even 80%. But the 80% also is huge, right? Of the 80% of people not being diagnosed and not able to, even if they're diagnosed, they either don't have access to a dialysis center close by or they can't afford it. And they're not covered by a scheme or whatever. For whatever reason, access and affordability are the two biggest challenges. They're not actually getting dialysis.
So I was once talking to a doctor who runs his own, a nephrologist who runs his own small dialysis practice, and he gave me a statistics that 40% of his dialysis is crash dialysis. So I asked him, what's crash dialysis? So he said that the first time when you come for a dialysis procedure is and there's no time to make a fistula and you have to do catheter, etc. That's crash dialysis, because people who are not even aware is what's the number, what would be the number at a, let's say, dialysis population level? Do actually half of the people even at a, they are not aware, or is it not timely diagnosed?
Yeah, so see, ideal world, people would be diagnosed in the early stages of CKD 1, 2, right?
Because when they start getting urea, creatine and albumin in their test.
So they would start, you would be diagnosed with a kidney problem at that age. Now, at that stage. Now, when that would happen typically is when somebody is a diabetic or a hypertensive for long years, right? They are in touch with a doctor. There is some form of treatment that they are getting. There is some form of interaction they have with the healthcare system. There, what would happen is, ideal world, CKD 1 or 2, they would get diagnosed. They would know that they have a kidney problem. Then they would be either in touch with the nephrologist, or early stage of kidney disease, you can even get away by your diabetologist or general practitioner. Then you go through the thing, CKD 1, 2, 3, 4. And at around 4, you'll start that D word would start getting mentioned, that, okay, you may need dialysis because you may proceed to kidney failure, which is end stage kidney disease. Now, that's an ideal world, right? But like you mentioned, hardly about a third or maximum half of people who are actually, in that situation would actually go through this whole thing. Majority of the cases, 50 to 60%, and again, it will vary. Urban, it will be a little better. Rural will be much worse. So that kind of variation you will have between cities, between where people are staying. But a lot of them would actually crash. So what would happen is, they would actually, that kidney disease is becoming worse, but it's like a frog in a boiling water, right? The water that is boiling. They don't realize what's happening to them because their normal keeps getting worse and worse, and they're okay with it. They don't even realize that something is wrong with me. And then until one point where either the blood pressure shot up really bad or the symptoms have become really bad, and then they just get into an emergency where they need to be rushed to a hospital. And at that time, all hell will break loose because they would have tested the kidney function and it would have come really, really bad. So a lot of patients, unfortunately, go through that route.
Sure. So timely intervention by a healthcare, let's say a doctor, clinician, nephrologist could theoretically delay the onset of
Absolutely.
CKD2A.
Yes, there are ways to delay the onset as well.
Sure. What percentage of people, as you mentioned, dialysis is also basically reversible and non-reversible. Of the 1.3 crore people receiving dialysis support, how much would roughly be reversible? And
so reversible is acute kidney injury or acute kidney disease. This whole number that I was talking about is only the chronic numbers. Acute is much, much smaller. Snake bite, a sudden accident, those kind of things in which the kidney function recovers. What I'm talking about, the 1.3, that is only chronic. That is non-reversible end-stage kidney disease.
1.3 crore patients in India. Wow. Let's go back to the progression of NephroPlus. From a few centers in Hyderabad, what were the next few steps? And what were the signs that gave you the confidence to expand? And how did the journey go?
Yeah, so the third center was in Mehboob Nagar. Then the fourth center again was in Hyderabad. The fifth center, we said we'll go out of that time it was Andhra Pradesh. The Telangana Andhra split had not yet happened. So we went to Bangalore and we set up our fifth center in Rammurthy Nagar there. Then the next one we did was in Agra. So we basically, it was like a logical progression, right? First was just one center. Then we did the multi-center model, then the multi-location model, then the multi-state model. Now it was multi-zone. So all these centers initially were in the south. We jumped to Agra straight away. And Agra was, very difficult compared to the South Indian centers, because it was very far, plus that whole culture is very different from South India. So, but then, somehow we managed. Now, the feedback that we kept getting on a continuous basis was patients were happy with the services we were offering. That was what kept us going, that we realized we were doing something right. And in the middle, we did an event called Ashaएं, which is a one-day education and entertainment event for dialysis patients. The first time we did that, we got a massive response because we marketed it really well. We said that this is going to be an event not only for NephroPlus patients, it's going to be for everybody on dialysis in that city. So we did first two years in 2011 and 2012, we did it in Hyderabad, where we called all patients of the city, and we had a very nice event where doctors would come and talk, patients would come and talk, dietitians would come and talk, and we had a bunch of entertainment events thrown in between those talks. So patients had a blast. So they said that till now, all these events were held only for doctors, and nobody would even think of us. So they had tears in their eyes at the end of the program and said that, thank you so much for doing this for us. And then we also did one very nice thing, is we had an elaborate lunch as per the dialysis patient's diet. So usually when dialysis patients go to a wedding or a family function, most of the things they cannot eat because they're either high in potassium or phosphorus or too much salt. So those things are very restricted for dialysis patients. But on this day, we had a really elaborate meal, which everything was as per the dialysis patient's diet. So the vegetables were leached, salt packets were given separately, food was made without salt. And, so the patients just loved that whole experience. So this event also built a lot of positivity about NephroPlus, that we truly care about our patients, So, and that event was a real big difference between what others were doing and what we were doing. So that kind of set us apart in patients' eyes.
And Kamal, were you always full stack? So in-house dietitian, in-house nephrologist, in-house technicians?
No, not at all. Nephrologists even today are not in-house at all.
They're consultants.
They're consultants. So they just refer patients, they come visit the center, they oversee what's happening, any outcomes, they check all those investigations, prescriptions, changes they make, and then they go. So we don't have a single nephrologist on our payroll, for our centers. It's all consultants. Dietitians are on our payroll, but not nephrologists.
And from those few centers to 450 centers today, are your centers mostly still standalone facilities, or are you housed mostly within hospitals? How does it work now?
So very few of our centers are standalone centers. Most are within hospitals. What we realized, while we love the standalone model, right, we realized that 10, 12 years back when we were growing, we felt that patients were a little wary of getting dialysis in a standalone center, because they had seen people die in the dialysis center. They've seen complications happening. They had this fear that what if something happens to me in the standalone center, who's going to look after me, While people who actually try standalone centers, they would never ever go back to a hospital-based center.
Sure.
But patients who've not tried that, they're a little, uncomfortable. However, we are now pushing the standalone model again, because we believe now there is a little maturity that has come into the market, and we feel that it's a good time to actually push the standalone, a little more and see how it pans out. So now we are doing a bunch of standalone centers. So hopefully it should work. I think the important thing in a standalone center is it has to be backed by a very good nephrologist who's ready to invest in the center in terms of time and make sure that they are able to counsel their patients to try the standalone centers.
But you started with the standalone
We started with the standalone model, and now in fact our first center also, we have a chat with the guests who are getting dialysis and tell them that try the hospital-based center. They are just not willing. They actually, scold us that why are you even thinking of this? And, they are just so comfortable with that standalone center that they don't want to go to a hospital-based center. But like you said, there is the initial centers were standalone centers, but then we had to pivot to a hospital-based model eventually. So about 10% or less, probably about 8% of our centers are standalone centers. The rest are all within hospitals at this time.
And what does an ideal or a model market to you look like? Because I'm assuming it's a capex heavy business where you invest upfront and it gets recovered over a few years. Does it make more sense in metros, or you have figured out the economic viability of setting up these centers even in smaller towns as well?
Currently, about 60 to 70% of our centers are in non-metros.
Okay.
Yeah, and we realized that that's where actually this kind of a service is needed. Look, places like Mumbai, Hyderabad, Delhi, you have a bunch of decent centers, right? The gap is in the tier 2 and the tier 3 locations where there is a sore need for such services.
Sure.
But there is no supply, right? So that's why we set up a lot of our centers in tier 2, tier 3 locations where this kind of a demand is there. And now with the government getting in, you have Ayushman Bharat and various state-run health schemes. So they pay for the dialysis and the patient gets it free of cost. So that helps this whole ecosystem to be able to, break that problem of access and affordability.
How does your payer profile look like broadly?
I would say about 50% of our sessions are 60% are paid for by the government. About 30% or 20 to 25% would be
commercial insurance.
Cash out of pocket.
Oh.
And the rest, about 10 to 15% or so will be private insurance.
So commercial insurance coverage is still
it's
quite
still low. Yeah. Because I think until now I think it is changing. Individual health policies would not include dialysis in their coverage. Only group health policies would include dialysis in their coverage.
And I'm assuming that the government and the commercial, especially the government backing, gives you the break-even demand, and the viability comes from the out-of-pocket segment.
Possibly difficult to put it that way directly, but yeah, it does help to build the volume. And what we realize is dialysis is all about volume. If you do, the only way dialysis can be sustainable as a business is if you have good volumes. A single dialysis center can never be commercially viable. A single dialysis center, very, very difficult.
You mean a single bed?
No, even a single center by itself.
Okay.
Only at scale it makes sense.
So that's a very interesting insight, because I was going through how these dialysis chains like Fresenius or DaVita grew up in US. They grew up by creating a rollover of these individual
acquiring chains. Yeah, acquiring centers.
Yeah.
A single hospital running a single dialysis center of even 8 to 10 beds can never ever be financially sustainable. Impossible. It is continuing that way because people are not looking at those numbers very deeply, but it can never be financially viable.
Oh, so it's continuing that way because even the hospital is not looking at specialty by specialty.
And it is too, if you look at dialysis, it's too small for a hospital. Hospitals are looking at ICU beds, they're looking at IP, they're not looking at OP dialysis. That's why most hospitals are, they are continuing that way, because that's just too small a chunk for them to even bother about worrying too much about,
On that note, that probably explains why so many of your facilities where a hospital has trusted you to run the dialysis facilities for you, right?
Yeah.
Because only an organized player with multi-city, multi-center footprint can
totally
run it.
And for them it works out much better, right, compared to if they did it on their own. Plus, they're assured of very good quality. Plus, this whole ecosystem that we built, the Asha and Olympiad didn't talk about, but the Olympiad, the good quality, the holiday dialysis, all these programs, good quality and growth. They get much better growth because people, they trust NephroPlus brand because the quality is much better. So that whole thing makes a lot of sense for them in all aspects, in all ways.
Sure. Have you also grown through acquisitions and rollovers or acquiring these individual practices of NephroPlus?
Most of our centers are taking over existing dialysis centers of hospitals. Most of our growth has happened that way.
Oh, okay. So the infra and the facility comes to you, but you go and install your own processes, SOP.
Yeah,
system.
it's like a Nike showroom in a mall, like a
Shop
Forum
and
mall
shop
or
kind
whatever, shop and shop.
Yeah.
So end to end, we manage the dialysis right from branding to staff to machines to protocols to outcomes, everything we manage. They just give us that thing, okay, you run our dialysis center.
And there's a revenue split. And
Yes,
for you,
of
it makes
course.
sense because then you don't have to worry about driving patients into your center.
To start with.
To
Of
start
course,
with.
once we move in, it almost always grows really well. But at least that initial volume is there on day zero. So most of our centers will be EBITDA positive on day zero.
Amazing. Kamal, I was also reading that in a lot of developed countries, about 20 to 30% of dialysis happens at home. Uh, Much safer option, I think, above all, and not requiring somebody to go to a center physically. Uh, I'm assuming that number in India is much lower, that percentage number.
Yeah, so 20 to 30%, I'm not sure if it's that much. My guess would be it's about 10%, 10 to 12% in most developed countries. There could be exceptions, but US, let's say US, UK.
Yeah, US is
Europe,
about 15.
Yeah,
Europe is
10 to 15.
Yeah.
But yeah, Australia, New Zealand would be a little higher. But roughly it's around that much, 10 to 15%.
Where are we as a country?
We are barely, you can't even put it in a percentage terms. It's a handful of patients who get home dialysis because there's one big difference there. All the home dialysis that happens in developed countries is using machines that are designed for home dialysis, except Australia. So you look at the US and Europe, right? The primary machines that are used for home dialysis are ones designed for home dialysis, which are either portable like the NX System 1, or you have the Tableau and other machines that are coming up now. So these machines are designed for patients to use them, very user friendly, very safe, and plus they have remote monitoring as well.
Yeah.
Right? So that is what, and plus all this hemodialysis that is done at home in these developed countries are done by the patient or their family member. In India, on the other hand, all the home dialysis, almost all the home hemodialysis is assisted hemodialysis, which is done by a technician who comes home, does the dialysis and goes. Another thing is, all the home hemodialysis that is done in developed countries is either nocturnal or short daily. Whereas most of the home hemodialysis that happens in India is conventional thrice a week, 4 hours. So these two big differences are there among the home hemodialysis scenarios in the countries that we're talking about.
Do you have a play in a model wherein you send trained staff to somebody's home?
We do. We have about 100 patients who do assisted home hemodialysis.
And how does the economics of that work out for a patient? Is that
it will be more expensive because the machine is going to be there, the technician is coming dedicated there, so there is an additional convenience. So it is definitely more expensive. But what we did is we innovated there also. So the traditional home hemodialysis, where the machine and the RO plant is placed in the patient's home, technician goes with the consumables, does the dialysis, takes the biomedical waste and comes back to the center, right? That's traditional home hemodialysis. What we did during the pandemic is we introduced something called dialysis on call, where the machine is not placed in the patient's home. There is a small tempo that is set up. The machine is taken from patients to patients' homes. Like 3 patients can be served on the same day with that same machine and the same technician. So you achieve a little bit of optimization there.
Sure.
The patient still gets dialysis at home exactly the same way. Just that the machine is not going to be in his house. In fact, some people prefer that, but they don't like a dialysis machine in their bedroom.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
That results into a higher utilization.
Absolutely. And reduces the price for the patient, improves utilization. So it works out well for everybody.
You spoke about Tableau and let's say the advancement in medical devices elsewhere, two-way information transmission from remote patient monitoring, etc. Where are we in India in terms of the devices side?
So unfortunately, these manufacturers are not willing to come to India. And there is one company that is making a regular hemodialysis machine, not the smaller one, not the home hemo one. But in their pipeline, they have a vision that at some point in the future, they will work on that. But as of now, they are still working on their regular large size hemodialysis machine. But hopefully, once the market becomes a little more mature, hopefully these manufacturers, right, of the current home hemo machines would hopefully come to India someday.
Sure. One big change that we saw specifically in the US was the introduction of value-based care. That's when the larger players actually shot off because they started getting incentivized for metrics and outcome. So if you are able to, if you as a dialysis provider are able to deliver better outcome compared to the local nephrologist, you get incentivized by the payer. Now I'm aware that we are far as a nation from reaching that stage, but are you able to demonstrate in a measurable and quantifiable manner higher patient's outcome compared to, let's say, other players? And my follow-on question to that is, do you see us progressing in that direction when either the payer or the customer is going to prefer you over your competitors because of the higher outcomes that you are delivering?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are one of the few dialysis providers in the country that publishes their outcomes. Our outcomes are published in international journals like Kidney International Reports and the other in Lancet. So our outcomes have been published in these reputed journals. Our research has been published in reputed journals. We've presented our data in international conferences as well, right? Now, the point you were making in terms of recognition of those outcomes, that is also happening. So, in fact, now if you look at the way governments are deciding their tenders, earlier it used to be L1 wins, that's it. There is nothing else that was looked at. Some basic qualification criteria and then L1, that's it, the lowest price. What we are doing is we are working with the government, trying to tell them that you cannot just look at price in something like dialysis. This is not a commodity. This is not a like a mineral water bottle, right? You cannot compare these kind of things. So dialysis is a service where quality can make a big difference, right? So we are trying to bring in something called a QCBS, which is a quality and a cost-based tendering, where they look at both these aspects, ask the providers to show what outcomes they have generated over the last few years, right? Look at quality metrics, clinical outcome metrics, and the cost, and then decide who's going to win the tender. And thankfully, governments are listening now because they realize in the past, having burnt their fingers, they realize that the quality is an extremely important part of the whole mix, So now, if you look at the many recent tenders, they've included quality as a part of the overall formula that actually decides on who's going to win the tender. So these things are changing and people are looking at outcomes. So these things are going to be more and more important going forward.
Yeah, in fact, in US now they don't pay you unless you deliver certain outcomes.
Absolutely. That's how it should be.
Yeah, players have come with models where the compensation is linked to delivering certain outcomes.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Kamal, if you look from the perspective of an outsider to dialysis as a market, it appears to be, I mean, if I can use a word, it appears to be a very lucrative market from the outside because A, very large market in India, B, very high repeat value, C, propensity of patients coming back to you even if you do a basic job because they need you.
Yes.
Their lives depend on, let's say, availing of your services. It makes you believe that it should be a, let's say, so to say, every VC's dream market, right? But we were discussing off the camera, it was incredibly hard for even you guys to build this business. Why don't you take us through some of the aspects which you realized in your journey, which made this journey difficult for you in terms of, let's say, scaling this business?
Yeah, so, it's easy to do good dialysis in one clinic, one center, right? But because there are so many aspects, right? There is the technician, there is the quality of the consumables, there are machine issues, a lot of issues that keep coming. What we did is we adopted the cluster model, where we set up clusters of centers, so a cluster is about 8 to 10 dialysis centers. Now, there were a number of challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges was the staff, because the technicians or the nurses are the ones that are actually delivering that dialysis to the guest at the end of the day. Vikram and I can pontificate and we can send fancy emails and record videos and send that this is how it should be. But unless the technician or the nurse who's actually doing the dialysis takes it seriously, it's not going to happen, right? You may have audits, you can do, which we do. We have a quality team that does audits and all that we do. But at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of that technician or the nurse to actually provide that good quality dialysis. So while we have these checks and balances of audits and so on, I think what we did, one thing that really helped us was we created our own talent. For the first few centers, it was fairly okay to get good quality talent from the market. But we realized after a certain amount of time that to replicate that whole process for a large number of centers is very difficult. So we set up a training academy called NPDA, right? And we started training people, which we picked up from the market, in the right way to do dialysis. Until then, what would happen was people who want to make a career, they would go into a dialysis center, and whatever the seniors would teach them, they would just learn on the job in the dialysis clinic itself. What we did is we had a solid 3-month training program where the full day they would be taught about the theoretical aspects of dialysis. That is, for example, what is the blood flow rate? What does it impact? If it goes high, what happens? Goes low, what happens? What is the conductivity? What is the sodium level? All those things, they would learn exactly what these things are, what they mean, and how they need to be set. Until then, it was blindly being followed that this needs to be this needs to be this. But what happens when it goes low, or it goes high, nobody was bothering about. So when we did this, we started pushing a lot of good quality technicians into our centers who would do things the right way, who would understand why he is giving 100 ml of normal saline when the blood pressure is falling, right? And not just give it, just as a blind faith or blindly just follow certain things. It was not happening that way. They were thinking what they were doing, and they were doing it because of that. They realized, they understood what they were doing. So that was one big challenge of staff that we addressed to some extent. Again, we didn't address it 100%, but we addressed it to a large extent. So now that NPDA program, we've now grown. It's now much bigger than what it used to be, and it's improving every day. And I think we are partnering with Emversity as well on that. So I think NPDA was a big thing. Apart from that, this cluster approach was another thing that we did well, where we wouldn't open just one center in, at a whim of somebody. We wouldn't open a center in some location. The strategy would be to create a cluster of centers close by so that it makes sense in all respects. These centers feed off each other.
This is not a very high margin model, but this is a high throughput model, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you don't have density, it would never make
absolutely
sense.
Absolutely. So even you look at it from the perspective of the quality manager or the biomedical engineer, it makes sense if they are serving one set of closely located centers.
Sure.
And then for that, there's a cluster manager, there's a cluster quality manager that looks after these centers. This whole clustering approach has worked really well for us. Another thing that worked for us very well was the partnering with a nephrologist rather than employing a nephrologist. So when we partner with a nephrologist, there is a very different equation, a very different relation than when you employ a nephrologist, right? And nephrologists are very well educated. They've gone through years of sweat and toil, and they deserve a lot of respect. And so I feel that nephrologists, they felt better about partnering with a company like NephroPlus rather than being employed by other companies. So that was one more thing that worked really well.
Kamal, the journey of an entrepreneur is full of challenges, full of ups and downs, and it takes a toll on everyone. And especially you charted this path while being a dialysis patient yourself, while battling health challenges. Did you think that your condition made you weaker or stronger to pull out this particular business?
No, definitely it made me stronger, right? Because I think it was my calling. I feel, that Vikram actually, like I mentioned, he sent me that email that day, and that's how the whole thing started.
Yeah.
So Vikram has been like a really, he's probably the brainchild. It's his brainchild. This whole company, this whole idea. And the amount of innovation he has brought in, despite not having anything to do with dialysis, in terms of personal experience, I think his brain is what has caused us to grow so well. Of course, in fact, some people say that Vikram is the brain of NephroPlus, while I am the heart. So it's a good combination. I bring in the softer aspects, and he brings in the cold, hard blood, numbers kind of vision. and he has a brilliant network. He has an amazing sense of financials. So it's his brain that has actually caused us to grow so far. But I feel that I have become much stronger, because when I see that because of my inputs we are actually making a difference to the lives of so many patients, I think I feel it really makes me stronger. It makes me feel much better about myself, because dialysis, especially long-term chronic dialysis for so long, 27 years, can play havoc on your mental health. It can cause a lot of mental health issues. But while I do grapple with some of that from time to time, I think the whole thing around making an impact on actual human lives, on not only making them live longer, but making them feel happier, making them more productive, making them feel good about themselves, I think that yields an immense benefit to me also indirectly.
Sure. Kamal, a lot of people entered this market. You faced competition from homegrown players, Apex, DCDC, Sparsh. Some MNCs also entered the market, people who were running more than 2,000-3,000 centers. So Davita came to India.
Right.
I think more than $30 billion market cap, if I'm not wrong.
Yep.
$10 billion of revenue worldwide. Eventually, and now the jury is not out anymore. So you guys are the clear winner. What do you think that you guys understood early on? What was your unique differentiated insight and differentiated execution which allowed you to win? And what did even the larger MNCs which have won many other markets, even they missed in India?
So one is, first of all, I would like to say that we haven't yet won. We are very far from saying that we have won and we've achieved what we wanted to achieve. We are still very far from that.
But you have the pole position when it comes
possibly, yeah. I would say that. But what, just coming back to your question, I think the India is a very, very different kind of a market, if you can call it that, right? It's a very, very different ecosystem. What works in developed countries will never ever work in India. So we need to understand that whole ecosystem, and we need to realize that I think frugality is very core to NephroPlus, right? If you look at our core values, frugality in every action that board says. So being frugal, making sure that we don't waste money, we don't spend money where it's not needed. At the same time, never compromise on the quality of dialysis or guest care. For us, we have our first core value says guest care comes first. So everything else is secondary. So I think keeping these basic values in mind, that never spend money that is not needed and try to save every rupee possible. At the same time, never compromising on the quality of dialysis that we are giving our guests, which is the reason why we exist today. I think these are probably a few things that I believe have contributed us to being, where we are.
What are the next few major milestones that you have in your mind about NephroPlus?
Yeah, so I think the India expansion is kind of now, in steady state, where we have a whole team and they keep adding 3-4 centers every month or so. Currently, we are looking beyond India. So like you're aware, we are already in the Philippines, Nepal, in Uzbekistan, Saudi Arabia. We are going to set up operations in the next few months. I think Saudi Arabia is the next big thing that's going to happen for NephroPlus. Apart from that, we are looking at countries where we can add value and where we believe that we'll be able to make a difference. And hopefully, I think if everything goes well, we'll probably try to add a country every year or so.
How do you select a new country to launch?
Yeah, so I think initially the thinking was that we should pick countries that are similar to India in terms of have a large population which is underserved, right, and have government reimbursement, because dialysis is something that very few people can actually afford to pay lifelong, right? Yeah. So it's important to have some means by which patients don't have to pay out of pocket. So these were some criteria that we used. But then we went a little beyond that as well to the Philippines and now Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan is a very unique thing because there the entire dialysis project is funded for by the government. Okay. There is a huge underserved population, so that worked out very well for us. Saudi Arabia was more opportunistic. So there's the government is going to re-tender some of their dialysis services. So that's why we went to Saudi Arabia. But there is no fixed kind of strategy. We are very nimble that way. We are very flexible. If we find a good opportunity, we will, opt for it.
And let's talk about your book, Kamal. What was the inspiration behind it? Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, so I used to write a blog, like I mentioned sometime
Yeah,
back.
and that started, in fact, the whole.
Yes,
whole
so
thing.
that Vikram reached out through the blog, and that blog had become popular, and I was writing at fairly, almost a couple of posts or 2-3 posts a month, and I think people kind of reached out to me and said that your journey is fairly unique and inspirational, so you should actually put down your thoughts in a book. And then the pandemic happened. It was the perfect excuse because I was saving time on commute. We were all working from home for the first several months, and then so I had a little more time on my hands. So then I thought that I should start writing the draft of what would become a book eventually. I think that went off pretty well. Of course, it took me about a year to finish that book, the actual draft, and then looking for a publisher and so on. So, but it was a very, very satisfying process because while it took a lot of effort to actually bring it out, the people who read the book really, they really liked what they read, and many dialysis patients read the book and they felt for the first time that if this guy could do it, why can't we? I mean, it's not that we want to set up a dialysis company, but at least, we want to get back our life. We want to work, we want to travel, we want to have fun, we want to lead a complete, full life, a productive life. So that was extremely heartening, where the book actually made an impact, and I felt that all the effort that I put in was well worth it because, when you're changing lives, I think that's no small win.
Sure. It was an absolute pleasure hosting you on the show, Kamal. Thank you for your time, but more importantly, thank you for giving inspiration to so many entrepreneurs, and thank you for giving hope to so many patients on dialysis.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Really pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.